Oops. Hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. I am obviously not Guy Stevens, the director of the Alliance. I am Jennifer Abbanat, in for him as he's on a very well-deserved vacation. I want to welcome everyone here. I am a volunteer with the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, and it's a privilege to sit in this chair. I know this is a very big deal for Guy to not be here, and he looks forward to joining the next time. I wanted to just let you know that the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint was started, as many of you know, in 2019 by Guy Stevens, and it was to raise awareness about the use of restraint and seclusion in schools across this nation. The mission of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint is to inform changes in policy and practice to reduce and eliminate the use of punitive discipline and the very outdated behavioral management approaches, and end the school to prison pipeline. Our vision is to see safer schools for students, teachers, and staff. And today we are very excited to have Connie Persike. She is a speech language pathologist, and she is here to discuss such an important topic that it literally is aligned with the mission of the Alliance, getting to the deeper why, exploring the why toolkit. As a reminder, today's session is being recorded and will be available to view or listen to later on many social media platforms, including Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, as well as will be an audio podcast. Please let us know who you are and where you're zooming in from or watching from. I know Guy always talks about the international stage that we seem to have. Obviously, this topic is something that is global. It happens no matter where you are when it comes to our children and the harms that are caused by seclusion and restraint. So, do we have any comments? Hello. Yes, my friend Pam. Hello, Pam from Canada. And we have April from Nebraska. Hi, April. Thanks for joining us today. We'll get started with the introduction for Connie. And as I said, Connie is a speech language pathologist. She is highly experienced, 20 years experienced speech pathologist. We're talking decades here, and an educational consultant. She holds a certificate in instructional coaching, positive education, and one of my favorites from the Butler University Applied Educational Neuroscience. Connie has served as a member of the multi-state work group to help develop the Common Core essential elements for English language arts. She is a published writer for Autism Parenting Magazine, if you're familiar with that. It's a great resource. She also writes for the Exceptional Needs Today, and she, of course, has written several articles for the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. And I encourage you to check out the website for those articles. She has several that are on rewards and token economies, and they're ones that I have shared across my district with everybody because it is so well written. So we just appreciate Connie contributing to the knowledge. She has created an innovative process to assess student behavior, and that's what I think leads her here today. It deviates from the traditional behaviorism approach and aligns with the current relational and neuroscience while maintaining a trauma-sensitive and neurodiversity approach. Bingo. We're so excited. And so please welcome Connie Persike, and I'm going to bring her up. Hi, Connie.
Hello. I think we have a question from April regarding the articles. Welcome. I'm excited. I'm excited to be here.
Yes.
I always enjoy these talks But I do want to say, I think I have an author's page on the Alliance website. So you can find the article about rewards there, April.
And you can search down at the bottom of the website. You can, in the search, you can put her name in there and it'll bring up all the different articles that she's written, because you've written several. In fact, a recent one you mentioned that you didn't write it, but I'm sure you had some influence by a recent article by your niece.
Oh, yes. Yes. My niece, she's here today. Yeah, she wrote the most recent article, I think, that was put out, wasn't it? About how kids should be able to do their own learning. Yes.
And how old is she?
She's 9. She's 9.
She might be the youngest.
And I'm her aunt, and she has strong beliefs about education.
So. Well, and you know what? That's what this is about, right? Yes. We're informing the youngest of our kids, because that's how they become the advocates they need to be, wherever they fall on the neurodiversity spectrum or neurotypical spectrum, whatever. So I see Ginger's joined us from Utah. Hi, Ginger.
Hi, Ginger.
And so April, feel free if you have any questions to you can put a comment in here, or we can make sure that through the email we can reach out to make sure we get those articles. And see, Courtney's already on it. So yay, Courtney. And amazing. So why don't we get started? And, I think we're in for such a treat. I've gotten to talk with Connie just the last few days, and I've been following her work because of being a volunteer. And I have to say, this assessment tool, the Why Toolkit, is exactly what we all need in our schools and in clinics, wherever children are that may have confusing behaviors. And I think the Why Toolkit is exactly what it is, the why. And that's where I think behaviorism has fallen short. And I recall, it's seared in my nervous system, asking about the whys when my son did some of those therapies. And they told me it doesn't matter why, he just needs to stop. And as we now know through the brain science, through, relational attachment, we know how important to understand those root causes are. Can you tell us a little bit about the Why Toolkit?
Yes. So I actually have some slides prepared to do a quick little intro, and I'm going to try to go through them really fast so that we can get to our conversation. So I apologize if it seems rushed, but I really want to get some questions answered and talk a little bit more casually. And hi, guys.
And we have now absolutely gone international. We have Guy Stevens, who is chiming in from Portugal. I don't know what time it is there, but I'm sure it's late, and hopefully you're not out to dinner with your wife. So we look forward to having you back when you're all well rested and back in the States. So, and thank you, Courtney, for putting all of the information about Connie's website and more information about where to find what we're going to be discussing about today. So, all right. So yeah, please would you like me to pull up your slides now?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, will do.
Okay. So I set out on this mission probably about, I'm losing track of time since COVID, but I want to say it was around 2015. And I started my business where I left the public school system in 2014. And then, I started getting calls from surrounding districts and areas around the state to come in and conduct some assessments, functional behavioral assessments. And I always struggled, and I was coming from a school district that had a really, really good process for assessing behaviors. Good in the sense of it was still rooted in some behaviorism, but we used a team approach. We were kind of, at that time, it was about, 10, 12 years ago, we were doing a lot of work around Ross Green and really understanding that kids do well if they can. So we were trying to incorporate some of that into our assessments. But the more I learned about Mona Delahook's work and just learning more about Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson's work and understanding the brain, I was struggling to assess behavior in the traditional behavioral sense. And so I always joke around that I basically made the why toolkit for myself. I mean, selfishly, I wanted to be able to sleep at night and be able to do the work that I wanted to do and feel good about it and have it align with what I believed in. So I started out on this mission where I wanted to rethink the way we look at student behavior. I wanted to reframe the way we did things. And I was, making changes to my process, and I would use it for a while and then I would tweak it. And then based on my experience in a school district, I would change it some more. And then when COVID hit, I was, I just decided I was taking the applied educational neuroscience certificate. And I decided, what, I'm just going to, take a leap of faith and create software for everybody to be able to use this, because the more I was training on the topic, the more the requests were coming in, like, we want to be able to use your process. Can we use your forms? Can we use your forms? Can we use your forms? And I don't know, for those of you in schools, when you're doing all this work around a functional behavioral assessment, and you're spending a lot of time evaluating a student and assessing things, to fill everything in on a fillable form just makes it even more tedious. And I just found sometimes that piece of it was very time consuming for myself. And so I set out to create software. So now we have a software system that's going to be launched, fingers crossed, within 3 to 4 weeks. I'm anticipating in January of 2024. There's only a few slight changes to make before it's ready to launch, but it's going to be a software system that districts or agencies, we're going to have a version for adults, just because, the more I started talking about this, the more agencies that service adults wanted a tool similar to this as well. But you can, create an account, you can buy student accounts, you can invite your team, because I definitely believe in when we assess student behavior that we should be assessing with a team approach, so that we get a variety of perspectives at the table and different backgrounds and disciplines. So you'll be able to invite team members, you'll be able to do all this electronically. And anytime there's duplication, it auto-fills for you. I just try to make it as easy for the adults as possible also, because we're doing so much work around trying to get to the root causes that I don't want us to be spending a ton of time on the tedious paperwork side. So that's the point of the software, is to make it as easy and efficient for the adults as possible. So that's kind of, long story short, why I started doing this. And I'm super excited about it. There's some major changes, like you said, Jennifer, that move away from traditional behaviorism. So I definitely take a very strength-based approach, and I'm not going to talk about these at length, but definitely we're assessing the students' relationships within the school setting, within their home setting, within their community setting. What we know about the brain now, it's very, that was one of my more recent, I even double checked and went back to make sure that everything was as aligned with what we know about the brain as possible. Very trauma sensitive and neurodiversity affirming. The more I listen to the lived experiences of neurodivergent individuals, and really especially took to heart this message that that's been sadly set to them for far too long, that they're broken and need to be fixed. And I'm hoping that this, when we get into the plan version of it, the beyond the why and supporting the student, that we're moving away from this feeling that we have to fix somebody, that we have to change them, that they have to continue masking and living up to these neurotypical societal norms, or whatever the main culture and main neurotype is. So I've embedded all of this. It's a very eclectic approach. And, it's really all about getting to the why, because if we don't get to the deeper why, and that's one of the reasons I always found, like, we do this functional behavioral assessment and we'd still sit down at the table to try to support the student, and we'd struggle with knowing what to do, because I feel, at least, a lot of traditional behaviorism is very surface level information, and we have to dig a lot deeper to get to the root causes, because what we think is causing the behavior is absolutely going to lead to our interventions. It's going to lead to how the staff respond. and how we respond is going to impact our students' experience or our child's experience. So it's definitely something that, has to start with finding the why, hence the name. So within this toolkit, I should be explicit. There's, the finding the why, which is what I'm hoping is going to be a replacement for the traditional functional behavioral assessments. And then there's going to be a beyond the why, which is the support plan. How are we going to support our students and staff to prevent behaviors A, and then B, what to do when we also have behaviors. So one of the main differences that I've done is I've moved away from typically the first question in a functional behavioral assessment is, what's the target behavior of concern? And it's been a really long time since I've seen traditional functional behavioral assessments, but that was always like a stopping point for so many of the teams that I was on, because very rarely does a student or an individual have one behavior. And so, I had heard from specialists who had an ABA background or applied behavioral analysis, you have to have a different plan for every function, or you have to have a different functional behavioral assessment for every target behavior of concern. And I was thinking to myself, like, are you in classrooms? Because teachers have a hard enough time keeping straight an individualized plan for one student, let alone two plans for one student. And so as I learned more about, and Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne-Bryson's work really inspired this. And then, of course, the polyvagal theory and Dr. Stephen Porges, but this wave of distress, and really trying to change our language around how we talk about behavior in students, realizing that most behaviors, if not all, in our younger children are caused from distress. They're that autonomic response that moves us into action to help us protect ourselves, and getting away from this, thought process that it's intentful to achieve a function, to meet a need so that they can achieve something or get something, avoid something or get something, basically. And so I worked really hard on the language of this wave. And a big part of my process when we're assessing students is to map out how they look. How they look when they're safe and secure and socially connected with the adults and the environment around them. What happens as soon as something triggers them and moves them into like that adaptive protection. And then I try to describe that as clearly as I can for people, because, if we can make that really predictable for the adults that are supporting our students, we could ease their anxiety. Making something predictable is one of the best ways to ease the anxiety of other people. And so if we can do that for our staff and our teachers, hopefully they can show up in a way that's going to be much more supportive and calm. And then we also want to catch it as early as possible, because as we're going through this wave of distress, going back to that neuroscience, that thinking brain starts to go offline, the feeling brain starts to take over. We survival's the focus. We become, have a harder time understanding abstract language. We become more concrete, more inflexible. We go into those fight, flight, freeze pathways that are really they're doing their job to protect us. And so if we can catch it early and catch those subtle signs of dysregulation, then we have more impact in the situation. And so that's the other reason I really wanted to map this out for staff. And then very rarely do students who were assessing their behavior have one behavior. And so this helps kind of talk about how that escalates and changes as they go through this wave. And then as they rest and restore and recover, what they look like. So we can make a really clear plan in each phase of this wave of distress on how to support those students. And the only goal once this wave starts is to bring students back to safe and secure, and get them back so that their thinking brain is back online. So, and then I kind of went through some of these definitions, but some subtle examples of unease might be a child's face getting red, their ears might get red, they might start increasing in movement. As they continue through the wave, they might start swearing, they might start breaking pencils. They might start refusing to do things, falling to the floor, until protection moves in, when you're either going to, fight and perhaps become aggressive. You might run out of the room. You might, shut down, put your hood up, slump in your desk, and then slowly, what happens afterwards as you recover. Their body might start getting still again. They might, cry. Some children have a release. Some children hum as they're starting to rest and restore. And then when they go into recovery, perhaps they're really engaged in sensory activities. They can answer simple questions. We want to map this out as clearly as possible so that the staff supporting the students know what phase they're in. And based on that, they can make decisions on how to support them in a way that's the goal is to de-escalate and calm the individual. And then the other big piece about finding the why is not only mapping out what the observable behaviors are, but it's also focusing on those root causes and really trying to determine the stressors that occur in that individual's life, what makes them more likely to have a behavior or decrease their window of tolerance. That might be lack of sleep. That might be a history of trauma. That might be a medical diagnosis of anxiety. That might be a history of really difficult moments and negative emotions in the school setting. That's going to make you much more likely to walk into that environment dysregulated. And then what are some triggers? What are some things that, based on our data, because again, we have to be making data-based decisions here because, Jennifer and I talked about this a lot this week. When there's emotions involved, sometimes we can make subjective opinions and ideas around why the behavior is occurring. And we really want to make sure that we're making some data-based decisions. And so based on our data, what predictably triggers somebody to move into that wave of distress? Because again, if we can make that predictable, we can hopefully eliminate some of those triggers. If they're a trigger that we can't eliminate, we can provide more supports around it. We can make sure that we're prepared. And if the adults feel prepared, again, they're going to be able to come to that situation in a much calmer state. We also want to definitely, bringing in that neurodivergent perspective, we want to make sure that we're creating environments, and we want to always be looking at our environments to make sure that they're neuro-inclusive. And so what are the students' neuro-inclusive needs? What do we have to do to make sure that our environment is meeting all of our students' brains, no matter how they're wired? And are there certain neuro-inclusive needs that aren't being met that are causing behaviors? Let's say a student is really sensitive to sound, but there's no external supports like blocking headphones or earplugs to help them. That could be something that we make sure we're documenting as a root cause so that we can, when we get to the planning section, we can talk about how to support that. So we want to look at neuro-inclusive needs, or what the student needs, what they're getting and what they're not getting. We want to look at both of those things in the environment. And then always, we're looking at the response to the behavior, the adult's response to the behavior, because I always say behavior does not happen in a vacuum. The way we respond impacts our students. The way the students respond impacts us. And we need to be aware of that this connected experience between the two of us. So again, anytime I'm assessing behavior, I'm watching about how the adults respond and if that's escalating the situation or de-escalating the situation. Because if my data shows that one type of response continuously is escalating, then I'm going to recommend changes to that based on what I know about the brain and attachment and co-regulation. And I'm going to help the team change those responses to be responses that can de-escalate the situation, and vice versa. You might see a response that consistently, based on your data, de-escalates the situation. And then we want to share that with all team members and get that down as a support that we're going to clearly use. And then also when we're looking at root causes, we're looking at some of those skills that are still developing. They're not yet mastered completely. The student might be learning them, but haven't completely moved those into a habit or automaticity. And they could be contributing to some behaviors. Definitely talk a lot about in the support plan that we as one individual or one side of the team should not be making decisions on what somebody needs to work on and grow and develop. That needs to be a joint decision among the student themselves, if possible, among the family, among the school team, or whatever team is talking about this. But moving away from, I have this behavior and I have to replace it with an appropriate response, because I want to my goal is to move away from that message that somebody is broken and we need to fix them. Instead, what skills are still developing and what skills does that student and that family want to continue to work on? We all have areas of growth that we can continuously grow and learn and work around, but we shouldn't be making that decision for anybody. That should not be coming from me as a professional and telling somebody what they need to be working on. And then I'll get into functions, but it's interesting because a lot of people are like, just get rid of functions. They're very traditionally based in behaviorism, but some state laws actually have it in their state law that you have to determine a function of a behavior. And so again, my goal is to replace the functional behavioral assessment. And to do that, we have to make sure we're still abiding by IDEA, regulations and state laws. And so because so many state laws still had that a function was required, I instead decided to really redefine the function of behavior and just make it about the why behind a behavior instead of that the behavior has a specific function, and that function is it reinforces, the behavior of the child, or it works for the behavior of the child to either seek attention or escape something or to meet a sensory need, because that implies intent. And again, my whole goal is to move people away from this belief that behavior is intentful and there's conscious
Connie,
thought.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to interrupt you, but
please interrupt.
Because I'm like, this is such an opportunity, because I think, I've been fortunate. I got to look at this whole toolkit. It is remarkable, and it is so overdue. We need people to have this in their hands soon. So it's so exciting. And one of the things that I made note of was exactly this on the functions, because we do have this, behavioral idea of there's always a function for this behavior. And then what do we then replace it with? But I love, and I don't know if if you feel, if it's okay to list some of your functions that you've talked about.
Yep, they're right. They're on this. Or can we still see the screen? Because they're on the screen still.
Yes, I was going to say my eyesight's probably not as good, but I have my, it's that connection seeking, need for co-regulation, sensory dysregulation, sensitive stress response, cognitive overwhelm. These are where we need to, redefine those functions. And, I love when people say, not attention seeking, connection seeking. And I even hear some teachers saying that a little bit more. But can you talk about some of these other ones? Hypervigilant neuroception of threat. What about the I appreciate the adaptive responsive to demands and exceeding someone's ability. These are things that we don't really think about in so many situations. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Well, it's interesting because oftentimes, just think about ourselves. Like I avoid things because I'm a perfectionist and I get into cognitive overwhelm very easily because I know how big that job is going to be to get it to be the way I want it to look. And so, sometimes it's as easy as like simply thinking about it from your own perspective, why we think children are doing things intentionally. Like I don't consciously say I'm going to avoid this work for as long as I can, so it all piles up on me. It's like this protective response almost. And so, yes, I've tried to break this down into, and I even moved away because language is so important. And there's so much research out there that talks about how the language that we use impacts how we think about situations. It impacts also how other people think about situations. And I'm always trying to use that as a tool to shift people's language. And so I even eliminated maladaptive because, if we really believe that the autonomic nervous system is here to protect us, and if somebody is moving into flight to escape a perceived threat or a real threat, then to me, that's adaptive. That's not maladaptive.
Right. Oh,
that's our brain doing what it's supposed to do. And so our brain and body. And so, so I even eliminated maladaptive from these functions and went on to adaptive. But I think the language that I've chosen to use too moves away from this intent. And it also, a lot of classroom teachers in particular have appreciated this so much because because I've been using this tool for the past, probably 7 years, and it's changed over the years because I've tweaked and changed, but classroom teachers above and beyond anyone else have been the most appreciative, because I feel like it finally speaks a similar language to them. Like I remember, you'd say tangible as a function and people would just look at you like, I don't even know what you're saying. But typically if somebody has, if all this paperwork comes up with tangible as the function, typically that child or that person they're communicating in a different way to try to get their needs met. Maybe that's because they don't have verbal language. Maybe that's because, they get dysregulated so quickly they can't access the words that they have. But, it's typically often the use of unconventional, and I say unconventional because it's not conventional work, a conventional way to communicate, but it's a different way to ask for what you want. Or, even something as high level as, oftentimes you'd have those kids that are on their iPad and they might have a hard time getting off their iPad, and the function would become tangible. But to me, I would sit there and look at it and I'm like, but they don't have the skills to negotiate. They don't know how to negotiate. Like my daughter at 3 was starting to say, Mom, can I have a couple more minutes? Mom, can I have 2 more minutes? I need more time. I just need to get to this piece before I can be done. I can't end this activity until I get here to feel good about it. And those are all high level language skills.
Yes.
Or share. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Or yeah. Well, my husband, it drove my husband nutty a little bit because we'd set a timer and she'd, start crying and not want to be done. And so I decided, she needs to learn how to negotiate. And so I taught her how to negotiate.
It's an important skill for life. Let's be honest.
It is. It's a very important, or even just expressing disappointment. Like, I'm really bummed out. I have to be done with the iPad right now. I don't want to be. I'm really sad about that. And so typically what I was observing in practice was, those were the kids that would come up with tangible as the function of their behavior. They just didn't have all that verbal language to be able to share that in a way that somebody could understand. And so, yes. And hypervigilant neuroception of threat, I have to say, is as soon as I started learning about Dr. Stephen Porges's work and the understanding of neuroception, that our brain and body are always constantly scanning the environment at a subconscious level to determine if we're getting cues of safety or threat. That right there made me
huge.
And then that some kids, because of their past experiences, because of their, neurodivergence, because of, my own daughter, because of her medical trauma, she was she had a very hypervigilant neuroception of threat. As soon as I learned about that, I was like, well, where does that fall? I'm like, that's a huge function. That's a huge why behind behavior. Where does that fall within our functions? Right.
It has served a purpose in her life at some point. And that's, again, why we, just to say something's maladaptive. No, it probably had a very important purpose for her.
Right. So, children with sensory processing differences absolutely become, more hypervigilant neuroception of threat, because some of that sensory input causes pain to them. So so their brain has been rewired to be on alert for danger. And as soon as I learned about that, that's when I started really, really questioning the traditional functions of behavior.
Yeah. So. And I would add, I highly recommend anyone interested to learn more about it. He actually has a new book out with his son that is meant for us lay people. It's not for neuroscientists. And and I'm blanking on the name of it, of course, right now. But it's a brand new book, and he and his son wrote it together, and it helps explain exactly what you're discussing. This neuroception, something that we don't have any conscious control over. It's sort of just like that sense of knowing something doesn't feel right, or something, is telling our bodies are sending us signals, and then how do we interpret these signals? But again, we don't, depending on our experiences up to that point. So it's an excellent book for anyone who's interested. I want to point out one thing, because I saw that on your root cause analysis slide, a quote that actually goes quite well with what we're talking about here by, and I'm going to pronounce the name wrong. I know it's Norman and Emma Vandercliff. So Norman Kuntz, is that how you say his last name? I forget. But you have the quote, "Be still and listen. What you define as inappropriate may be my attempt to communicate with you the only way I can." And anyone who isn't familiar with Norman and Emma's work, Norman, I believe, has cerebral palsy, and I think Guy's interviewed them before. And again, incredible work of helping other people understand, someone who has challenges communicating in vocal words, language, which many of our neurodivergent kids do. And so how do we see what we see, and how do we interpret what we see? And your mindset that you were talking about, that is going to determine, are we judging them, or are we going to see they might need something, and I need to figure out more. So I love how you've reframed so much of what we think about behaviors.
Thank you. It's definite. And as you brought up, I do have a lot of quotes kind of built into the software, into the forms, because a big part of this is shifting the way people think around behaviors, because if we can help them reframe the way they're thinking about a behavior, they can show up with empathy and compassion and support versus frustration. And I think that has to be a huge part of whatever we're doing when we're trying to support our students.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. And so then I just put this visual on here because Beyond the Why is all about trying to find ways to support our students around their stressors, around their triggers, around their neuro-inclusive needs. We want to make sure that the environment is it's working for all types of brains, and providing different external supports if they need them, adapting our light if somebody's sensitive to the light. We want to make sure that we're always looking at the environment also. But that's what the whole support plan is around. Like, prevention is the biggest piece of it. How can we prevent the behaviors from occurring in the first place? By making sure our environments are appropriate, by making sure we have the supports in place, by eliminating some stressors and triggers if we need to, and if we can. And then once that happens, really utilizing some of these supports that we know calms people down when they're going through the wave of distress, no matter what age you are. No matter what age you are. I always say, like, I watch sometimes and I think, wow, if I came home and told my husband this big problem I had, and he said, "Oh, that sounds like a small problem to me," or "What size of the problem is this?" I think I would get more angry and try to prove to him, no, this is not a small problem to me. So our responses need to be all about being attuned to what somebody needs, being able to have a relationship to help them co-regulate, to be able to provide empathy and validation about their experience. It doesn't have to be like not our perspective on that experience, but their inner experience, and validating and empathizing that. So that's really what the Beyond the Why is all about. Is prevention is the biggest chunk. And then once this wave of distress occurs, how can we support the staff and the students during those times? Okay, I think I'm done with my slides. We can move into, yes.
Okay.
Just some question and answer.
Fantastic. And, I have to say, that is just a very small amount of the information. It is so comprehensive. It's as if you just, like you said, you reassess things as you went through life in the last few years, and almost like changing because you see the needs evolving with different times, and you have nailed it as far as a comprehensive tool that is, when we think about a functional behavior assessment, it provides a very limited amount of information, in my opinion. Because again, it's not taking this whole child integrated approach. Your toolkit absolutely feels integrated, and we don't talk about that enough, I think, within behaviors and within developmental things that we see with our children, especially our neurodivergent children. Was that intentional to kind of bring this comprehensive integration together to evaluate not just a behavior we see, but to look at this whole picture?
Absolutely, because the more I really went on this deep dive around what causes behaviors and how we've traditionally assessed them, we need to make sure. I mean, I've even had doctors talk to me about, if somebody is having difficulty with sleep, do not do any, a special ed evaluation right now, because sleep could be impacting so much of their entire life. And so, I absolutely did that intentionally. We need to look at the whole person and see, like, do they have, adequate sleep? Do they have adequate relationships? And all those things that we know support overall wellness and overall, positive mental health. How are those currently for that child and that person? And so absolutely, that was intentional, because again, we want to try and prevent as many behaviors as we can. And if we can proactively, increase some of those wellness supports, we can decrease some behaviors.
And for the audience, one of the parts of this whole assessment toolkit is something that you call wellness. And, that's exactly, I mean, again, I've never seen, I remember as that parent saying, well, he was actually in the hospital yesterday. He hasn't eaten much, and this is why we're probably seeing. And they'd say, no, that doesn't matter. And so you talk about that, the sleep, the nutrition, what are the positive relationships? Obviously we now know how valuable, through Bruce Perry's work and the ACE studies about having that power of one even. So I love that you've included this again, because it's missing from everything that we talk about when it comes to our kids who are struggling. It's and just the sleep. Let's be honest. I don't even know the stats, but the sleep challenge is a significant one. So many kids go to school with poor sleep habits, and again, because that's just how the neurodivergent brain. Many of our kids have sleep problems. I mean,
I have a lot of sleep problems, so I really do get it.
That makes sense. That was something that was on your mind then, based on your experience. One thing,
and all of our tolerance is lower when we're tired and we're fatigued and we're hungry, and so we have to be looking at that.
And then you're told to go do something, and then what's the human response? When you're in that condition. It's not going to go over well for adults or for children.
Right.
But yet adults, we are granted some, forgiveness of like, oh, well, they didn't sleep well. Children don't seem to get that same benefit of the doubt. It's just that, but they just, and it gets back to my next question about how you've included so much about the adult response. And I've never seen that in any kind of any assessments, any forms, anything that we use so much on our children. But you really discuss, there's a staff support plan that's a part of this. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about why you're including these questions that are basically a self-reflection for the adults in the room?
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's because of the work I've done for so long. And, I worked personally with in an alternative placement option for students with some pretty significant behaviors. And I just learned very, very quickly that my response dictated the outcome. And so, I mean, absolutely, what we do, how we show up, the way we look, the way we sound, all of that impacts our students. And I don't want to take away from the fact that what our students do impacts us. It absolutely does. But I also, we're the adult in the situation. We're the ones with the fully developed prefrontal cortex. In most cases, I know there's some there's some younger people just starting out in their career that potentially aren't there yet, but I feel like the brunt of that responsibility has to fall on us. And I don't even feel like it's equal, because we're the adults showing up in that situation. Yes. And so,
so true.
Yes. And so we have to always constantly be reflecting. I mean, maybe that's just what I always did. Yeah. I always stopped and reflected afterwards and thought, what could I do differently next time to make this a different situation for that student, to have this outcome be different. And now that I'm in my role as a consultant and a coach, I'm oftentimes watching that from that perspective, and I'm watching how adults respond and whether that helped the situation or hindered the situation. And so again, I don't think that there's any other way to do it. We have to be looking at our response and how we can show up and in a way that de-escalates the situation. Yeah. And also, I don't want to take away from the fact that sometimes we forget about the staff, and we forget that, hey, they just watched a really, really big behavior. And whenever a child goes through that wave of distress, oftentimes the adult is going through the same thing, just at, hopefully lower peaks, and not that, they're not going through it at the same intensity, but they're still going through it. And we need to make sure that we're supporting our staff, during it, so that they respond in the right way, so that they're prepared to respond. Because if they're not, that's oftentimes when mistakes happen. If you're not, if you're not prepared, you either overreact or you you yourself go into fight or flight, or you freeze, and I've seen several staff freeze and get really injured.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, I think that's where we end up having incidences of seclusion and restraint, because the adults have, basically their bodies over responded because of that, your mirror neurons, right? You're seeing this, now my system's doing this, and now I'm, we've got two nervous systems dysregulated, and we know how that goes. I love what Dr. Lori Desitel says is, my nervous system goes first, or the adult's nervous system goes first. And that's exactly right, because you are of no help and service to that child if you are not. And I love another idea of this. It doesn't mean you're calm, because of, you're human, and you're in a position that, like, okay. However, you're still grounded. You still have a connection and a sense of self, just to be able to, okay, what do I need to do in this moment? And it's not about being calm. It's about, okay, I need to support this child in some capacity, or I need to keep the other students safe. And so I'm going to get them out of the classroom and then handle this. I mean, so that you have some thinking, that thinking brain that we talk about. So,
and a part of this was also to make things like, that's why I made the wave, and I made the wave at the end of the assessment. It's just clearly maps out what the student looks like when they go through the wave. Yeah. But at the end of the Beyond the Why, it's also has how the staff should respond. And just like how kids need to rely more on visuals when they're dysregulated, so do adults. And so I want to make sure that we have those supports in place for the adults during those moments also. Do they need to rely on visual supports? Do they need to rely on frequent rehearsal of how to respond? Do they need to ask for a break? Because, hey, I mean, I've been there. I've multiple times, said, you have to feel safe enough within your team to say, I just need to take a break and step away. I'm not the best person to be doing this right now. And so, because we're all human, we all have different stressors on our lives. And if I show up to work on a day with a migraine, I might not be able to handle something the same way I would the day before. And I need to feel safe enough within my team to ask for a break. And if we don't talk about these things, if we don't make a plan, and if we don't say what we're going to do, you don't have the thinking brain to do it in the moment. And so you have to be prepared. Yeah.
Right. I see that neurodivergent by nature, Pam up in Canada she's a volunteer for the Alliance as well. Can you please share how apraxic and dyspraxic observable behaviors would fit into this functional reframe?
Well, oftentimes I think I don't like to say behavior is always communication, but behavior is always communicating something to us. So
Right.
I'm always looking at, is if somebody is apraxic and they have difficulty, moving, having the motor planning to be able to respond when asked to, or, spontaneous
Hmm.
communication is very different than um, for an apraxic individual than it would be if if they were asked to say something. So I'm always looking at that, I guess. That's what I'm always looking at. Could this be a root cause because they can't, motor plan to be able to say what they need to say verbally because they can't, verbally get the words out that they need to use. I've seen a lot of students who actually more so since COVID than ever before who have word retrieval issues even,
Yes.
and that's one of the long COVID impacts is having retrieval difficulties with your words and being able to retrieve the words you want to use. I don't think I'm joking that over the last 2 years, probably 80% of my students who have conducted an assessment, like a behavioral assessment on, have also had a word retrieval issue. And so, of
Interesting.
course, when you can't find the words that you want to say or you can't
Yeah.
say them in that moment, that's going to lead to frustration. That's going to be a big stressor on
Hmm.
somebody's tolerance level. So I
Absolutely.
don't know if that
No.
answers, but
Well,
it's definitely
Pam will let us
constantly,
know.
definitely constantly a reframe that
Yeah.
I'm doing.
So we talked about, and I appreciate you mentioned how you, in this you have embedded so much educational resources and lots of quotes. I see Stuart Shanker's in here, Dr. Mona Della Hook, Dr. Ross Green, Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, and Dan Siegel, and I know there's many more. Mike, you
Yes, you can
use
see
one.
who inspired my work.
Yeah, well, right.
So,
And I was going to say, and one of my favorite quotes, and it's not someone who I don't think is in this psychology world. I'm not sure. Alexander Den Heyer, I think is how you say the name. And it's when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. Can you tell us why you chose to use that quote in here among all the others?
I just always find that analogies help people understand things. And we never, like, I'm a big landscaper and gardener. And if
Yeah.
something's not growing, I don't look at the flower and try to change that. I look at, okay, am I not watering it enough? Am I not doing enough, feed? I don't use Miracle Grow, but like organics,
Yeah.
like Miracle Grow versions. What,
Nutrition.
right? Do I have
It's
it in
the
the wrong
nutrition.
spot?
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, I don't know. That has to be what we look at first. We have to be looking at the environment and our response instead of this automatic. We need to fix the child, and so
Yeah,
we
no,
need to
I
change the child.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so Pam did clarify, and it's interesting because as she's rephrased it for us. So I guess my question is, when what they communicate, either vocally or gesturally, is opposite to their intent, and I would say that happens a lot. And I think there's a lot of, unless you're the parent and maybe you understand that, there's a lot of people who don't understand that. And so my child does that a lot, where he says the opposite of what he's intending, or his word choice is mixed. Again, when you kind of live in a state of fight or flight, you do have challenges
Mm-hmm.
accessing the right vocabulary sometimes, and sometimes things just come out. And so for me, I learned I had to repeat what he just said, and I found 9 times out of 10 he'd say, "That's not what I said." And it's like, oh my gosh. I mean, so I think, getting back to behaviors and reframing it, always really getting to know that individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Letting, maybe we don't know, but if we always assume best intentions and assume something is trying to be communicated, even if we don't understand it, um, re-saying things back. Maybe you can speak more to that, but that was something that I personally found was the most beneficial. But what it did cause is challenges when it was somebody else, because they take his word at his word, but that's not actually what his intent and what he was trying to communicate. So for example, like maybe he wanted a purple cup and, he said, I want the green cup, but he meant to say, and in his mind, he thinks he said purple. But in fact, what everyone else heard was, no, you said green. So, can you speak to that a little bit more?
I would put that, I would definitely be watching for that. And I see that a lot in laughter. Like laughter is actually kind of one of the observable behaviors of moving into fight flight.
Yes.
But people assume intent to that, especially non-speaking autistic students.
Yeah, right.
They assume, see, they think it's funny, and they put their intent behind it.
And how inappropriate, and they must lack empathy because they're laughing about something that isn't what other people would say is
right. See, this behavior is intentful.
Yeah.
They find it funny.
Yeah.
And so I would map how that looks. I would put that in the wave of distress. Like I often put laughing in protection in that phase. And I make sure everybody in the team knows that's not the intent. It's not because the intent isn't I'm funny. The intent or that this is funny. The intent is I'm moving into the flight pattern, and that's a frequent behavior that happens there. And so same with your son, if that was something that frequently happened as they became more and more dysregulated or moved through that wave of distress, I would put that in as a descriptor on what that student, what he looks like. So everybody would know that and not assume intent and like maybe provide, objects for them or visuals to be able to support that need.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And back to resources, you can't believe the resources that she's included in this. I recall, I think for most FBAs, there's a language that most people don't understand unless you're maybe, a behaviorist, but even we know many other staff people can do an FBA, but the language and the terminology and parents get the report and they're trying to understand it. You use a lot of language that is it's just not part of FBAs that we see. And you also provide such an amazing resource of definitions and how those words that you're describing kind of, how they move and correlate with maybe a behavior that we're seeing. Can you, I'll say just for an example, you use the word vagal break, and I believe that was on the wave of distress. The other one is protective factors. Can you talk about why you decided to use terminology that, for us, we understand what protective factors means. I mean, like those two words, like protective factors, we can kind of put those two together. We may not understand it in this sense, but for example, like you were saying, tangible, that a lot of people just would say, I don't even know what that is. Whereas protective factors, you think, oh, well, that's interesting. I wonder why that's included. Yeah. Can you, and there's a whole sheet of definitions of how these words are used in this. But it seems like it's really functional for the adults.
Yeah. So what I found is even before I got to this final version, I found that there's never enough time to do training, especially for parents, especially parents who need support. And so we're in meetings, and that's why I started embedding the quotes, because I wanted to, find a way to educate and shift thinking. But then the definitions, I would often find myself, I'm super sensitive to the role of how a parent must feel coming into an IEP. I have a sister with cerebral palsy, and my mom went through, all sorts of stuff. My sister's in her 60s, so things were not great back then when she was younger. And, even my own daughter, she has a health plan, and, I get the perspective of a parent coming in all this lingo being used. And so I would often find myself putting definitions in front of them, making sure I explain everything. And so I just built that right in. Like in the software, you can hover over the words, whatever. The words have like a symbol. And so the definition will come up as people are completing the document. And then there's also like a printable version for people to be able to print out and give to other people at the meeting, because I think, again, visuals are really important for everybody. So
it's very user friendly. You know, it's not, and it's not a checkbox.
No.
You know, so I think for people who might just be looking to, you know, just check, but you really, it's very personalized, and looking for much more in-depth detail.
Yes. And I tried to do a mix of, you know, like I tried to think about this from the user's perspective also. And I really want the forms to lead the process for people. And so I tried to make it as explicit as possible. And so I feel like there's a mix of checkboxes and open-ended, because if I thought the question, maybe not everybody would know what to answer, how to answer that, I tried to add some examples, but I always put an other, like, because you know, everybody's different and not everybody's going to fall into a checkbox. And so I try to make sure that we can still individualize as much as possible. But here are some best practice tools that we know calm individuals, no matter who you are. Empathy, validation, that kind of thing. And if it was in that situation, I definitely made those checkboxes. And throughout this whole process, I had a lot of sensitivity readers, neurodivergent individuals, parents of neurodivergent individuals read through it. And because I wanted to make sure the language was super sensitive to, I'm always very, very conscientious of language, and I don't ever want to offend anybody or like bring up past trauma or triggers. And so there's been like, you can see on the website, there's a list of people that I've thanked for looking over it and giving input. So, you know, and I want to listen to the lived experiences of people who have had these tools used on them, or the parents of kids who've had these tools utilized. So
that's amazing. You know, as we're wrapping up, I think there was one slide that I didn't see you go over, so I'm hoping that you might. Something that I was like, this slide is kind of amazing. The growing tree.
Oh, yes.
And it's a continuum of growth and learning for social, emotional, and behavioral skills. Can you talk a little bit about this slide? Because I when I see this slide, it's just like, from, like you said, the beginning to then thriving and everything in between. And it's such a wonderful analogy for our kids.
Right.
And even us adults. Because we, you know, my goodness, I've grown more as an adult than I did as a child in the sense of, you know, social emotional so maybe you can.
Sure. And that's a resource so when you log into the software, you have a dashboard, you can create a student account, you can assign a team, you have resources at the top to help you like complete the assessment. And then there's the growing tree, which basically I made because I kept hearing everybody say, oh, he did this yesterday. Don't let him fool you. He can do it. He can do it. He's manipulating you. Just because you're watching him, you know, he can't, he's manipulating you, but he can do this. He did it yesterday. And I found that people just weren't, you know, we get it for academics. Like we get that if somebody's learning to read, they might be able to learn a sight word today, but not yesterday. And we don't think and assume malicious intent. Like we don't think, oh, they're trying to manipulate us. They knew how to say that word yesterday, but we do it all the time for behavior and social emotional skills. And so I wanted to break down what actually goes into learning anything you learn, and, you know, really getting into that thought process of neuroplasticity, how our brain creates new neurological pathways. Or creates a new habit, which is even more difficult than, you know, sometimes I think, you know, our older students who have been using behaviors to communicate or to, you know, there hasn't been another way for them.
Right.
Nobody's listening. So, it's going to be harder to break a habit that's already a neurological
it's
pathway really
it's a
ingrained.
pattern that's been established, and those that wiring has really gotten stronger. And so
Stronger.
it is,
Stronger and easier to activate. So I went through like what happens as you learn and like what all it takes to get to automaticity and to develop a new habit, so that people can really understand that no, this isn't willful intent. This isn't them doing it on purpose. And then I also add in there, the whole fluctuating capacity piece.
Yes.
Because somebody can, again, look at it from our perspective. Just because I could present 5 days in a row and be different every single one of those days based on, if I have a migraine coming on, if I'm not slept, if I haven't slept, if I have something really big in my life happening.
Back to all those wellness
that
we as if everybody's just a robot and every day's equal. Maybe you're getting over an illness, or I love what you're talking about with kids who have had even adults who have had COVID, that brain fog that people are sort of experiencing, and kids may not be able to explain that to us. Adults can say, I feel this. Kids don't necessarily have that same language skill. So I think that's so important to really to always have in our minds, I guess. Always be thinking about.
And we might use all of our capacity one day. I know if I travel, I know if I'm going to travel and go do a presentation, I need to make sure I don't book myself for 2 days afterwards, because it takes me that long to recover. And so but we don't give kids that same understanding, it seems like. And so we have to realize that all people, no matter what age you are, have fluctuating capacity. So,
so true.
And it takes us a while to develop. The older we are, the longer the neurological pathways are to develop. But I don't want to, of course, there's always hope in neuroplasticity, and we can always create new pathways, but it doesn't happen overnight. You need repetitive practice. So,
and it takes kids much fewer repetitions to learn something as it does us more mature adults. Because we've had our own patterns that have been established. I know.
Absolutely.
And that's why, working with kids younger and younger is the most beneficial way to establish those positive neural connections. So this has been as fabulous as I was envisioning it after having conversations with you. So how will districts and professionals be able to access the toolkit when it becomes available?
So actually, can you pull up my slides? Because I have contact information for you. Well, let's see. So there will be, I think we're going to launch with just a child version. And I see the question, will there be a parent version? Absolutely, you can use it. There's going to be like a caregiver version. I don't think that will be exactly right away at launch, but there's going to be an adult version, and a child version. And when you go to register, you can say whether you're an individual, an agency, or a district. And so it's not limited to just school districts. It's like a parent could purchase this just as one copy, one student, like one child account for their child. And on the dashboard, it says student or individual, because I didn't want to get really wordy and say student, child, individual. It's just student or individual. So you can go to the website, supportablesolutions.com, the Y Toolkit, sign up for the mailing list. I think that button is right down here. Sign up for the mailing list. And then when we launch, which should be by the end of January, when we launch, we're going to send a mailing, like a blast, to inform everybody that we're launching. If you have any questions in between, you can email me at support@supportablesolutions.com. I have quite a lot of people emailing me already about it, so that's not a bother. I have no problem meeting with somebody or answering questions. I already have several parents and employees like reaching out to me to meet with their directors, to meet with their, Department of Eds, so that staff from the Department of Ed, so that we can get this rolled out as soon as it becomes available. So.
Fantastic. So I want to thank you for joining me today. And I know it was kind of a short last minute type situation. So we really appreciate your flexibility and all this amazing information. And again, you can go to Connie's website for more information and get on her emails so that you get the latest updates when this toolkit comes out. And
I'm just reading the comment that you've been waiting for months for the launch. I know we are behind. We are behind in the launch, which is somewhat mortifying for me. But
it's not much better. It's been an evolution. So that's exciting. Guy,
I guess more goes into software development than I ever thought, but
it definitely makes it more accessible because it is a software compared to so many other things, I think. And then that communication of being a software where people can easily access it within a team is really beneficial.
I have to say, because I think this is a really cool piece. I also, because I worked in a school for so long, I know it's really hard to navigate, like, okay, so we have this plan set in place. Now, what do we have to do to make sure we're actually abiding by this? Because especially if somebody's in special education, a behavior support plan is a legally binding document. If you say you're going to do something, you better be doing it. And so I created inside the software, there's an implementation guide. So all you have to do is go through and highlight, like, let's say you're going to provide visual supports for somebody. You're going to provide an alternative communication system. You're going to provide, preferential seating, whatever it is. You can highlight it and it goes on to it automatically will add to the implementation checklist. You can assign a team member to create it if it needs to be made, and you can assign a due date. So then we're like holding each other accountable and we're getting organized. Like some of it is just like being organized and divvying out the tasks to do so that we make sure we have all the supports in place that, that need to be put in place. So
you really have thought of everything.
I mean, thank you.
And that's probably in part because you've been using this toolkit yourself and tweaking it as necessary. So what we're all going to have access to at some point is an amazing toolkit.
I hope so. I hope so.
And so again, please check out her website. She has a lot more information on there as well at Supportable Solutions. Guy will be back. I don't know if he's still on, but he will be back from Portugal at some point, and he will be joining for the next live event series. Please, if you like these live event series, if you like the content that the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint is putting on their website and doing within communities to protect our kids, please consider making a donation. Thank you, Courtney, for putting that up. We can't do this work without you. And, it's such important work. And if you've been following the Alliance for any period of time, the significant changes that we are seeing within legislation, within schools, within, all kinds of areas where children were otherwise subjected to so much harmful practices such as seclusion and restraint. So we appreciate your support. And so stay tuned for the next live event series that will be coming up. And I know I can't wait to hear about Guy's trip. So I'm sure he'll fill us in on that. So thank you again, Connie. We appreciate your time and everything you're doing to help everyone in the field wanting to do better for children. And through your education and this amazing toolkit, I have no doubt that our kids are going to be the ones that benefit.
Thank you. I'm excited. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a fun time. I've enjoyed it. So thank you.
And
I get to finally meet you. So that's wonderful.
Yeah. And if you want to hang on for a minute as I say our goodbye. So thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you at the next live event. And of course you can see this. It'll be instantly available on YouTube, LinkedIn, and again on the Facebook Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of the day.